Hi, thank you so much to all of you for joining us for this evening's Q&A for IFC Films, The Novice. My name's Mara Webster with In Creative Company. Before I bring on Lauren, I just wanted to let you know that there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions throughout the duration of this evening's conversation, please feel welcome to put any questions that you might have into that box. We'll keep an eye on those and try to jump to a couple of those towards the end of the discussion. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the writer, director, and editor of IFC's The Novice, Lauren Hadaway.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks so much for joining us this evening, and congratulations on all of the Spirit Award nominations. I feel like it's got a whole slew, including Best Director, Best Film, Best Editor. So that's 3 categories just with you alone already.
Yeah, it's kind of nice, especially after doing post-production in my kitchen during the pandemic. No idea if film festivals or anything are going to exist. So yeah, it's been good, I gotta say.
And I wanted to jump in and start by talking about the central character of Alex, played by Isabel Fuhrman, because it feels like there's so many beats in the story and the way that you've told this story, the psychological aspects of her as a character that come from the fact that she's a woman who really strives to be the best, but isn't naturally gifted as being the best. So she is in that position of having to work twice as hard, whether it was when she was at school or whether it's this endeavor with rowing that we see her go on throughout the film. And what was kind of the point that you realized that narratively that gave you a much richer story to tell, and there were so many different narrative places that you could take the arc within that?
I mean, well, there's a lot of things I can say about that. First of all, I love the sort of obsessed artist trope film, right? But the thing, usually in film, you have the coach or the mother, or they're trying to win the big game or go to the Olympics or whatever. And I've never related to that because I've always been very internally driven. And I sort of wrote this inspired by my years as a collegiate rower. And I was totally obsessed with it. I was doing 20 hours a week on top of double majoring and interning and working and being super active in a lot of things and just fucking dead tired. But I think I was obsessed with it despite the fact that I'm not built to be a rower. I was never going to go to the Olympics. I was never going to get a career out of this. Like, I don't know, like, what is that from? Like, why the fuck did I do what I did to the level that I did it at? Because I could have done it and half-assed it or whatever, but I went full tilt. And so for me, this was kind of my character study and wanting to do a film, the obsessed artist film, that is very much about the what if someone's internally driven, which I think most of us are. And it's really hard to do on film because, again, it's a visual medium, it's a sonic medium, and it's not a novel. So if you're not putting it on the screen or in the speakers, like, how do you tell that story? But that actually became the kind of creative, the fun and the challenge of, like, how do you put the audience in the headspace of this character, 99% of whom don't know anything about rowing, and hopefully 99% of whom haven't experienced this level of obsession about something, right? And that kind of dictated the creative choices and really the fun of it, and trying to, like, do my slant on something that I think's been done a million times before.
No, I think that's a really great way to approach it. And did you find that actually, by the fact that it was rowing and it is this space that has certain attainable goals that the audience can really understand, okay, she's trying to reach this time, now she's trying to reach this time because she's achieved that goal, actually really helped in bringing the audience inside of it? Because, when you're watching something like Whiplash, it can be, listening to art and creativity can be subjective, but with this is very clear delineations. And how did that also really help you in terms of structuring the story, in terms of where are these kind of attainable elements that she's trying to reach to, and then once she gets to that, what's the next arc for her as a character?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because it is like a frustrating thing as a writer. You hear this thing all the time, like, you got to have stakes. What are the stakes? Like, what? And it can be fucking irritating, frankly. But it's a very real thing, and, like, you need a benchmark from which, like, the character and you, the audience, can know where we're at, where we're going. And yeah, I mean, really frame this loosely. This is a little bit slightly tangent to what you're asking, but framed it loosely as a sort of love story between Alex and the sport of rowing. So yeah, there are the literal, she needs this time, she has to get X, these are the 3 things she can check off, 1, 2, 3, and we're on to the, she did that, on to the next one, on to the next one, and being very clear, like, this is what we're doing, we're holding the audience's hand, we're guiding them. But also, too, framing it as a love story between Alex and the sport, in the situation of, like, you have the initial attraction and the clunky beginnings and the kind of the first, and, like, falling in love and getting to know each other, and then the first time making love, which is the 500 frames a second scene, and then being the bliss in love. I think anyone who's ever been in love, that feeling of, like, wow, this is going to last forever. Like, this is great. This is amazing. Like, this is, I found it. I am God. And then it just like crumbles and falls apart. Right. So that too, I mean, there is the number aspect and the I have to get this time. I have to do the around the lake row. I feel like there's one more thing I'm forgetting right now. But then there's also the relationship aspect too, that I really tried to frame the story around to give it some sort of device that the audience can feel like, okay, we're actually going somewhere with this and not just like a, all over the place or whatever. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
It doesn't. And I really, really kind of like cottoned on to that idea where it is this real relationship that she has, and that idea of that love and that connection at the different stages. And you can really see it in the visual aspects. Like the first time she gets into a boat, like you were talking about, that clumsy feeling, she's not quite sure how to move with the boat. Her shirt's getting caught up in it. There's the moment where we see her just even touching the side of a boat, and everything else just kind of gets quiet around her. And it's just her and the boat in that moment. And so how did you set about, once you knew that it was kind of that romantic love story, finding those visual aspects, like those beats throughout the story that would really express that internal connection to the audience? Because one of the challenges that comes across in this film for making it really is just so much of it is about an internal character journey, and you're finding different ways to really bring the audience into the externalization of it.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to, I have a whole first career in post-production sound, and I had this sound mentor of mine who said two things to me that really stuck with me going into trying to do writing, directing. He said, one, that the best directors have intention with everything they do, and also two, like everything that if I cut in a sound effect of a dog barking, right? He's like, why is that there? Like, if you can't tell me why it's there, you don't fucking put it there. Like, it has to serve the story, everything to the story, right? So if you apply that to the Novice, in this case of this girl who's obsessed with sport and falling in love and getting obsessed and chasing this seemingly pointless endeavor, right? I think that sort of dictated the creative challenges. And then two, going into making my first film, it was November 2016 that I set a 5-year goal to transition out of sound into writing and directing. And at that point, I was very actively like, how do I do this? It wasn't just like, I want to be a director. No, it was like, how do I be a fucking director? Like, how do I actually do this? And I researched, a lot of my favorite directors, their first film, the scope, the scale, all of these things. And you come back to this cliche of write what you know, write the story only you can tell, but also like write what you want to fucking see, right? And as someone who was a rower, there aren't really a lot of rowing films. When I was in college, 2010 is when Social Network came out. And there was that brilliant scene in the Social Network, which probably most people who've seen the film are familiar with. But that's like one scene. And there's never been another film that's really captured rowing the way that it felt to me, to these life and death stakes. And like when you're watching it from the sidelines, when you're watching it on the Olympics, it looks like very serene and peaceful and like gracious, you're like, wow, like this is like an elegant sport. But when you're fucking in it, you want to die, right? And I wanted to make my version of a rowing film that felt like you want to fucking die. And so that, like, between that and between, trying to tell the story of like, where's this character in this journey? Where is she, like, in terms of falling in love with the sport, and how is she feeling? Like, that dictated these creative choices. And I wanted every rowing scene to feel very different, right? Because if you do the same thing over and over and over, it's going to feel repetitive. So you have the kind of final race, which is your Fast and Furious race. You have the more kind of romantic things, you have the more psychological things. But if you look at every rowing scene in the film, whether on the water or kind of in the rowing erg room, there's a different feel to it. And it's really just sort of tracking, like, where is the character at mentally? And then how do we fuck with that? Like, how do we make that a scene in an event? It's not just like a inspirational sports film or kind of we got to make it feel fast and quick cutting. It's more than that. I wanted to get trippy and I want to get surreal with things.
Yeah. And I love that you were bringing up your experience working in sound design. I mean, you've worked on incredible projects, including with Tarantino, and the sound design is so striking in this film. And there's a lot of moments where, going back to what you were just saying about it has to feel intentional, where you're intentionally bringing us into the sound design and making us really aware of kind of like nuanced sounds that are being emphasized. And then there's moments that you really play into like the subtlety and the quietness in different ways. And so for you, what led the difference between those moments where you really wanted us to engage with the sound on screen and moments where you just wanted it to kind of seep into our minds, but not for us to kind of pause and consciously be aware of it as much?
Well, I think the whole experience visually and sonically is guiding the viewer. And I think the beauty of sound design, and this is the one thing kind of like coming out of sound, going into hopefully a career as a writer director, I want to take it with me. And I want to sort of champion this idea, because whether you're especially if you're an indie filmmaker, like sound is a pretty cheap tool, right? And I always say, like, if you want to get very crude about it, you don't fuck the design of it and the sort of creatives of it. Like, if you want to get about to the money aspect of it, it's cheap, right? So if you have a scene with 100 people, you don't need to have 100 extras. You need to hear 100 people, and you just see like 10 people, right? So those kind of things. But that's something that came in very early on. And then too, it was very clear from writing the script into the lookbook and everything. Like, I always wanted to play with the juxtaposition of quiets and various sort of cacophonous, kind of overwhelming things. And I think the beauty of sound is that you can, because most people are thinking of visual, but again, half the cinematic experience is sound, right? So, and I think sound too, you can fuck with people on a subliminal level. They don't realize what's happening, right? And granted, most people seeing this are going to be seeing it on their laptop or the TV or whatever. But in a theater, like if you put something in the surround, the left surround, and they don't even know it, like it's gonna, like, you as a human being, as a creature who's evolved to survive and not be killed by something stalking you and trying to eat you, if you hear something behind you, it's gonna, like, your ears are gonna twitch, right? You're not even conscious of it. So if you think about that, like, you can really fuck with the human being on this really interesting level. And then too, if you want to get deeper, you play with sort of frequencies and things like that. If you know how sound works, and you can have something sound very loud and not actually be that loud if the thing before it was very quiet, right? So if you're aware of all these things, you can really fuck with people. And I think my goal with the sound was not, I mean, my goal with the sound and the visuals both is to, like, have the audience feel on edge. I don't want them to feel particularly, like it's in your face. Like, the edges aren't sort of sanded off. It's rough and it hurts a little bit. And I want that, because I want this feeling that as you approach the end of the film, like, I wanted this very much this feeling of, it feels like you're driving off the cliff. It's like the ending of Thelma and Louise. Spoiler alert, they're like fucking driving towards the cliff and they're going straight off. And kind of, I was consciously trying to make this film very much felt like that. And I didn't want the audience to feel like they could breathe until it was over.
Yeah. And, we were talking at the beginning about the editing, and you were mentioning editing a lot of this on your kitchen table. And I wanted to talk about the editing, because I think the editing is really, really spectacular in terms of the pacing that you find in scenes, kind of where those cuts are, in terms of when you're kind of jumping between different camera takes, when you're allowing just like one continuous motion to really live on screen for a while, and especially because you're directing a film and then that you're going into the edit room. How did that really help you when you were on set, because you kind of already start to have an idea of what you're going to put together in a rough assembly, and just the way that you're already thinking about post-production while you're choosing your shots and setups?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a cliche, you write a film 3 times: when you write, when you direct, and when you edit it. And I think that's very true. And for me, going way back to my quote unquote origin story, I saw Kill Bill, wanted to be a filmmaker, wanted to be a director, went to college, was overwhelmed. I was a redneck, went there. Everyone there is like rich and from the city and they're dudes. And I'm like, I can't be a director. But I went into post-production. I went in specifically to editing, because for me, it felt like an extension of what I love to do, which was writing, right? And that's kind of what led to me actually discovering sound and doing that whole career. But with editing with this, I mean, maybe in some ways me having that background was good, because my first job out of college, I cut reality TV, very classy. Donna Decorates Dallas, leopard print carpet and jewels and things like that. But yeah, I mean, there was a confidence in kind of going to this too as an indie film. Like, we had spent so many years of I guess not so many compared to a lot of indie films, but it was a lot of sort of, we got to get the money and sort of slashing the budget and what can we do. And then when we came to time to make the film, I mean, me and my producer, Ryan, I remember we had this conversation, like, we have post budgeted, but we don't really have any money left. Like, let's just get the thing shot and like on a hard drive. And worst case comes to worst, like, I have a background in editing, I have a background in sound, I can get us started, right? So there was like that confidence from the beginning. And I think me coming from this background of 1, editing, 2, sound, and also 3, I mean, just being in sound and working with editors. And I think especially I mean, obviously mostly in post-production, but the editors were second in command in terms of the creative storytellers on a film. And having worked in sound and worked with editors firsthand, like, you really see how they kind of shape everything. And I think I had a unique education coming into this, because I didn't come into it. I didn't direct short films and commercials and music videos, and like a lot of first-time feature directors have, but I came into it from this unique education of doing a lot of dialogue and ADR supervising, which probably 99 out of 100 people who are going to listen to this don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But what's important is that I go into a room with the director and with the actor, and I'm watching them interact and how they're doing all this thing. And sort of also too, being post-production sound, you're on the ass into post-production, right? So you're seeing the film come together from a 4-hour assembly down to whatever's in theaters. You're seeing how the editor cuts in different sort of scores and temp scores and versions of it, and what scenes are cutting out and moving around, and what they have to go and reshoot for whatever reason, or what ADR you're shooting, which is dubbing to sort of the actors come in and record their lines after the fact. Like, especially on an action film, they're basically rewriting the film afterwards, right? So all of that was like a unique kind of education, and I think having that background, definitely going into shooting it, like I was constantly calculating in my head all of these things, because we ran into multiple scenes of shooting, especially exterior, like in the weather, in the rowing, shooting on water. It's a fucking nightmare. I mean, there's a reason Clint Eastwood's like, I'm never going to shoot a film on the water, because it's a goddamn nightmare. But ran into all these disasters, and if the lightning, there was a scene where the lightning started, and we had to cut the scene short, and we had only filmed half of it, and I had to calculate in my head, okay, like, what do we need? Can I rewrite the scene to take like the second half, the information that happens in the second half of the scene? Like, okay, and like doing this like literally like within minutes, because the producers tell me we gotta shut down, we're fucked, like all this shit, like what can we rewrite? Okay, I can rewrite this, I can set it interior, we need this information, if I wrap it up like this, editing in my head in that kind of way. So going into shooting, like that was all very much important. And then too, I mean, having the editing in mind early on became especially paramount for shooting on the water, because shooting a dialogue scene is pretty, you and me are talking, we got basic, even an idiot can at least get the coverage, right? Like, put a camera on you, put one on me, we get a wide, basics. But shooting on the water is a nightmare. And I think, me and Todd, the DP, we learned very quickly, like we had to know exactly what we need to tell the story. Going back to telling the story, like we need a shot of the boat coming in here. We need to see the tip of the boat. We need to see this character looking to the right. We need to establish his geography of where everyone is, because they're not on the frame at the same time, right? So all of these came into play, and really having to think in your head, like, how is this going to, closing your eyes, like sitting in the shower, having an existential crisis, thinking, how is this going to look? Like, what is this film looking like in my head as you're playing it in your head, right? And then you have those shots, and you have to trust that you've edited it in your head in such a way that you've got everything you need, because we didn't have fucking time to get coverage on, like, especially the final race of the film, which we shot over 3 nights. Like, a lot of those shots, we had like one take of anything, and you look in a frame in either direction, it's unusable, right? We had to trust that if we got one take that was usable, we just checked it off and we moved on, because we did not have the time. And that, in a way, was editing kind of going into it. And then too, I mean, when you get to the editing process, I think, like, if you compare the first draft of the script versus the shooting draft of the script versus like what we shot versus my assembly edit versus what you see the final product, everything is very different, and it is a discovery process. And the first edit of the film was 2 hours and 1 minute, and I think the final theatrical without credits is like 93 or 94 minutes, so there's almost 30 minutes of shit that's been cut out. And there's full scenes and things cut out. I think, you shoot what you need, then you kind of discover, you throw the clay on the pedestal or whatever, and then you shape it and you kind of figure out what it is, and you throw things out with it.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And going back to what you were saying about shooting on the water and all of the kind of logistical nightmares that come with that, and there being a reason that Clint Eastwood doesn't want to do it again. I'm so impressed by what you've achieved cinematically in those scenes, because you haven't just taken a camera and gone in a boat side by side and just gotten that shot kind of going along the side at like different close-up levels. The camera is moving around the characters all the time. You're really bringing us so close into Alex as a character at different moments, from different angles, from different sides. There's that really beautiful shot where she's changing seats, and we get to kind of have the vantage point directly above her and the other rowers on the boat. And so I was really, really interested in how you set up your shot list, and just logistically how you approach filming all the scenes on the water, given that it's not about 1 or 2 angles, it's not about 1 or 2 setups, it's really about this real fluidity that you bring with the camera in all those scenes.
Yeah, I mean, it was an evolution. Again, look, I mean, to be totally frank, I don't have production experience. I walked onto set the first day and I saw the boat with the fucking techno crane in it Like, and I was like, wow, that's like a real thing. Like, this is a real fucking movie that we're making. Wow. Because I, in my head, I'm imagining, it's just, this is the way I work with anything. If I'm traveling to a place I've never been, I always imagine like the quaint kind of like redneck version, probably 100 years ago. But I imagine like, a fishing boat with a guy, a camera on his shoulder or whatever. But no, Todd was incredible. And he got all the equipment we needed. I showed up and saw the extent of things. And I think too, the grip department, I mean, it happened at a lot of phases because too, no one on the crew besides me knew anything about rowing. And so I had to be very active in it, but I don't know grip and I don't know camera. I don't know these things. I know what I want to see. I don't know how to get it right. But the things like dealing with telling the grip, like, we can't put these fucking clamps on this shell because it's a honeycomb shell. You're going to snap it. You can't step here. You're going to put your foot in the hole and you're going to sink the boat. Like little things like that. And telling, the follow boat with the techno crane on it, like, you can't go this fast. Like, you can't be this close at the speed because you're going to swamp the boat. It's going to sink. We're going to lose half a day of shooting. So these kind of things were kind of always in the back of the mind. But in terms of like getting those shots and things, I mean, I think the thing that I've like learned as a director, and I think, I learned this coming from my first career and going into this as well. It's like, I don't need to know the how of every little thing. Like, I don't need to know what, all these specifics. I need to have it in my head and be able to communicate it to Todd. And I think that's the beauty, again, my DP, the beauty of working with him is like, and this is his first feature film as well, but working together, like he just connected with it. It could translate that into the technical aspect that I didn't fucking understand, right? So a lot of these things you're talking about specifically, like I had this in my head of what I wanted to see, but like if you had to tell me, hey Lauren, like this is what you want, now how do you make it happen? I couldn't fucking tell. I mean, I could give you an answer, it would be wrong, right? But I think the key is you hire people who know this shit and who are so nerdy about this shit that they can take your vision, and they're so like into it and into the camera, into the lenses, into the techno crane, into all these things, that they're like, this is their passion too. The ideal scenario is you have a whole crew of people who everyone's working on their passion projects. I mean, that never happens, but that's the dream kind of situation. But yeah, again too, and it's in thinking about the framing of the shots, it goes back to, again, what are you trying to tell with the story? Not just the literal, like, where's the boat, where's this and that, but where's the character in the journey? What is happening emotionally with this character? There's a lot of like action scenes where we're not really watching the boat from the outside. It's not a lot of quick cuts. We're like in the boat, we're close up, we're very tight frame. She's going in and out of focus, because to me, it's like the scene isn't about winning this race. It's about this character killing herself to win the race, right? And so that dictates kind of everything. And again, I think the key is like always keeping in your mind, it's like the thesis statement when you're a student in high school. What is the thesis statement of your paper? Every sentence you write after that has to go back and like say something about that. And I think that was key.
Yeah. And, one of the other scenes that has really, really incredible camera work is the moment where, going back to the romanticism, it feels like it's like the first time that Alex and Rowing are kind of like making love with one another, where you really slow everything down, because it's really impressive to look at the fact that, that scene is mostly shot in a shadow. You're just lighting Isabel in that moment. It's slow motion. So you need a lot of light in order for the camera to pick up that level of detail as well. So what were some of the intricacies that came with putting that particular flow of shots together?
Well, first off, I'll say that idea actually came from, I saw Macbeth, I think it was 2013 with Michael Fassbender, and there were those scenes where, he's killing the sword and it's super slow motion. I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, it's an action scene and it's so thrilling to me, but barely anything is happening. So that was in my head from the beginning, and I wrote it in the script that way. And then Todd came on, and it was tough because that was, we shot with a Phantom, and those are expensive, and we had gone over on our first week was Water Week as a director, which is extremely intense, but that had added like 2 days to production, and so we had already eaten through our post budget, and obviously budget and things were a huge consideration. But that's something that I had to, my producer, Ryan, especially, he really tried to make that happen. And I try to be very collaborative with my team. If things, we don't have the money for this, we can't do this, I try and make it work as best I can. There's not a lot of hills I will die on, but that was a hill that I was like, Ryan, this is a hill that I will die on. Like, we have to get the Phantom. We have to shoot it this way. We have to fucking make this work. And he made it happen. However he did it, he made it happen, and we had the Phantom, but it was extremely stressful. And, yeah, there was like a huge spotlight. Again, I couldn't give you specific details, but it was insane to see it from my uneducated point of view, to walk on and see like this giant spotlight. I'm like, what the fuck is this? And Todd's just saying something like, well, it's a super slow frame rate. We need a lot of light. You got to like flood this thing with light. And I'm like, all right. And Todd was very active with the camera. He shot a lot of things himself, but like he shot everything for that scene himself. And I would like watch him do things like with it, and very much a dance and very quick and this and that. And I would give him notes, and again, and he would shoot back like you have to be moving because it's going so quick. Like it doesn't look good unless you're super active with it. And I was so intense and focused, and we were running out of time and whatever. And Todd was very intense and focused and like trying to just get one more and like in it and totally addicted to it. And Isabel was intense and focused and like loving this thing. And I was telling her too, like, Isabel, this is a scene. This is like your 1990s erotic sex scene, right? I'm going to objectify you in this. We were all having like, she was having fun. Me and Todd were stressed as fuck. But afterwards, she told us it was like watching mom and dad fight, because you two were like tense but loved each other, and trying to like, because I was pushed, Todd, we have to move on, and he's trying to get another take and trying to get what we need. But it was tough. I mean, again, it's like, he knew exactly what he did in terms of the technical. I knew what I was trying to get in terms of the shot list. He had the creativity of it. Isabel was totally down to do take after take and totally completely invested in it. The producers, as stressed as they were and about to fucking lose their goddamn minds, I'm sure, about as we were like stretching, the minutes and whatever, they made it happen. And I think, again, it's coming together and kind of recognizing those states of like, what is really, really, really important to this film, and like, what are you willing to like, sort of like, I'm going to put my flag in the ground and like, we have to fucking make this happen, which you can't do with everything, right? Because then you become sort of a diva or inflexible or this and that. And it is a collaborative medium. But I think for that, yeah, that was kind of in my head for literally years before we shot it.
Yeah, no, I mean, the payoff of that scene, it's so worth everything hearing that you went through there. I wanted to jump to a couple questions that we have people sending in. Someone was asking, how did you work with the actors on their character development? And did you have time for rehearsals beforehand?
We didn't really have like a rehearsal period. What I would do every single day before shooting, this was kind of became actually very therapeutic for me, because it's extremely stressful to make a movie. But I would go into the makeup trailer and hang out as whoever was getting ready and talk to them about the scene, talk to them about where they're coming from and where they're going, and just get a feel, and I think that helped a lot of things. And talking to Isabel and Amy and Delone since kind of shooting, I mean, the thing they told me is like, it seemed like you had a question, like you had an answer for every question that we might have had. So I understood these characters front and back. I knew what was driving them, like where they came from, where they were going. I never gave them like a document. You read about that times, like you give an actor a specific document of these things. I didn't give that to them, but I had the answers in my head. Like I had thought a lot about it. So I could sort of answer any questions they had about motivation or what they were doing or where they were feeling. And again, it started in the makeup trailer. And then in terms of rehearsals, what we mostly did was, it's the blocking thing. And one thing I would recommend to any kind of like up and coming filmmakers who maybe don't have a lot of experience is like, I watched a master class with Ron Howard, which he did a class on blocking specifically. Like he covers a lot of things, but for whatever reason, blocking wasn't something I hadn't thought about a lot as a filmmaker. And it's very obvious in hindsight, but like, again, you and me are talking, right? So when you're writing the scene, when you're thinking about directing the scene, you're thinking about how do we capture you listening? How do you capture me talking? Like, what are we doing with the camera? But in a film like this, you have an entire rowing team in the background also there. And some of them are background and the AD covers that. But like anyone who's a supporting cast, like they're looking at you wanting to know what the fuck they're supposed to be doing. Right. And that was like a realization for me, like, oh yeah, I have to tell these people what to do in the background. But the fun of that too is you get to tell those people what to do in the background. And so in some ways, that became adding to the character of you and me are talking, but these other three supporting cast or in the background, and you can have them do things and you can deal with their sort of, the hierarchy of their relationship and the sort of their personalities and the way that they sort of drag something across the screen or how they call to each other and how they interact with each other. Like that is all really fun. And I think something that, very quickly I caught on to, obviously, because I had to, but it wasn't apparent kind of going into it. And then I think too, in terms of working with actors, I tend to be I think directors are mixed on this. I think, I want them to be able to say what's on the page, but I'm also open to changes. If someone tells me, hey, what do you think about this line? If I genuinely think it's better, I'm like, fuck yeah, let's do it. I'm not sure. I'll say, let's get it both ways. But if I don't think it's going to work, I'm not afraid to say, well, I am afraid to say it, but I choose to say it anyways. I'm like, you know what? Let's do it my way. And I think the key is, the thing that I've learned as someone working with creatives and being a creative myself is that people really want a cage, in a sense, like not a cage maybe, but like a yard, right? You want to know what your boundaries are. And I've talked about this with Isabel and being like, Isabel, you're not a dog. I'm not a dog. But how I relate it to is like, a dog is really well behaved when it has a master who's in command. It knows where its like territory is, like what it's protecting. It starts getting neurotic and like chewing the walls up and going insane and barking nonstop when it doesn't know what's going on, right? So I think the key for me, both in terms of giving sort of direction and in receiving it, like what I really crave and what I really want for people, is to be very clear about, this is what I'm trying to do. This is the yard you're playing in. You can do whatever the fuck you want within this yard. Like, it's all you. And certainly if an actor or a crew member, whoever, comes up to you and says, I have this idea, what do you think? Fuck yeah, you collaborate, you listen, especially if people know more than you about things. But you don't want to run into the case of this classic, like, where are we going to eat? Wherever you want to eat, like whatever's good. That's like the worst fucking thing you can do. And I think the kind of like newbie and young person thing to do, and I've been both in many careers and relationships and whatever, is to say that thinking you want to be, pleasant and easy to work with. But I think it's better to have a very specific idea of what you want, communicate that clearly, and then just be open to kind of adjusting as you go.
Yeah, you just got to choose the restaurant.
Yeah, please.
We have a really great question from Morgan, who's saying the score and the soundtrack are amazing. What was it like working with Alex Weston? And how many of the songs on the soundtrack are songs from Connie Francis and Brenda Lee? Could you talk about these choices?
Oh, yeah. So I think there's 2 Connie Francis and 1 Brenda Lee, or maybe 2 Brenda Lee and 1 Connie. I can't remember. But so that's 2 separate things. I'll talk about the songs first. The 1960s love songs were something that I had written into the script pretty early on. And that was kind of I wouldn't say an accident per se, but I wrote the first draft of the script and, the story was in my mind. And Spotify has the kind of recommended for you playlist, right? And I listened to a lot of oldies music. And one of those songs, I believe it was Aldi Law, which is in the middle of the film, came onto a random playlist and I heard it for the first time ever. And immediately, and this is probably 2018, early 2018 or late 2017, because I wrote the first draft July 2017. I heard this song, and like this whole scene that happens in the middle of the film with the foggy row, and there's like a bird that flies across screen, and it's bliss, and the sun is rising, and it's like, it's like it's fucking love. That all hit it came into my head. And I remember listening to that song on repeat. I probably listened to it 60 times. And all of that clicked. And that was the first seed of an idea. And I remember telling my producers about it kind of nervously, like, what do you think about this scene with this song? And them reacting really positively. And then things developed from there. And I think multiple of those tracks were actually written into the script. And a lot of those songs existed in the edit. And there was Aldi Law, Someday I'll Want You to Want You, and I'm Sorry were the 3 that I really, really wanted and that had been in the edit from the first time I cut the scene. And we were able to get those. And the other songs, we kind of had to fill in as we needed to get cheaper versions or whatever. The score was a different animal. It was the last thing to kind of come together, and it was pretty brutal. I mean, the score was the one thing about the film, honestly, that I never had a very clear idea about what I want it to be. And, editors, they're not just editing the film, they're also cutting in the first version of the soundtrack versus in terms of sound design and also the score. So if you see, as a sound editor, when I get the first empty film, there's already the whole like draft essentially of what the film is going to be from the editor who's cut these sounds and these temp scores in. It's a very extensive process. It's very complex. So I had done this obviously in the sort of premiere and in the timeline, but I had re-temp scored the film, cutting in different sort of vibes of music, I think 3 separate times, which is a lot of work for a film. And it had gone from sort of on the nose kind of dronal heavy tense stuff to even techno to even more comedic kind of thing, like trying to figure out what the fuck it was supposed to be, and nothing felt right. Finally, there was one track in the film that did feel right, but it didn't match anything else. I remember telling everyone, like, this track doesn't fit anything else, but it seems right, but I don't know what to replace it with. And it turns out that was the only track that was right. Everything else was wrong. But it didn't click for me until I started learning French as a pandemic hobby, and I was only listening to French music for like literally a year. And it was probably August. This was before all the festival deadlines. And I was so sick of listening to French music, but I didn't want to break my rule and listen to American music. So I put on a Spotify playlist of like random movie kind of soundtracks, just because for no reason. And by chance, a track from The Farewell came up, which if anyone's seen the film, it's nothing like The Novice, but something popped up, and kind of like All Du La, like when I heard this song, this track, it clicked in my head, like the opening shot of the boat spinning. And there's kind of a very simple vocal plucky thing that happens in The Farewell. And it clicked for me. And I was on a drive at the time because there's nothing else to do during the pandemic but fucking drive. And it, like, I had this inspiration, and I turned around, I drove home, I cut like 7 minutes out of the film and retemp scored the entire film using tracks from The Farewell and Moonlight, and maybe a couple other, I think Alex Weston did a couple other things I had used as well. And then I sent him this really passionate, manic email, like, "You've inspired me, 11th hour, you must come on and help me make this film, blah, blah, blah." And he's told the story since then, like, yeah, it was just a Tuesday, I was having pizza and I get this email, and I was like, okay. But for me, it was like a life or death scenario. And so he came on, and then that was like the final piece that made it kind of all click together. And then working with him was great, because I think recording the soundtrack for this was the first time he had been back in the studio since the pandemic had started. And it was pretty extensive. I mean, I don't know what he's used to getting normally, but if you look at our notes that we got, like, I was sending him novels back. Like, I loved everything he's doing, but I'm like very specific on what I want and how, and cutting in different temps and taking things and improving things. And it was an extensive process, because we only had the money to really record real instruments once. So we had to get everything right with the kind of like temp MIDI stuff. And then he recorded it, and it all came together, and it was like the final piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I love all of those details. And, speaking of your learning French during the pandemic, I know it's the middle of the night for you because you're based over in Paris now. So don't want to keep you any longer, but thank you so much, Lauren. Genuine pleasure hearing you talk all about the film, and congratulations on everything again with The Novice.
Thank you. It was lovely talking.